And so we're diving into some pretty dark territory today with, this whole grooming gang phenomenon, especially in the UK. And we asked you guys what you wanted to explore. And this was one of the top requests.
A lot of people
They were going deep.
submitted this one.
Yeah, into Conrad Reicher's 2025 book, Grooming Gangs, A Nation's Betrayal of Its Children. And I think, right off the bat, I want to be clear, this isn't about, it's about really understanding this problem and how deep it goes and where these roots are coming from.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that Riker does so well in the book is he just lays out the sheer scale of it.
Yeah.
We all heard about Rotherham, but he suggests that the true number of victims nationwide could be in the tens of thousands.
Oh, well.
It's not an isolated incident.
Tens of thousands.
Systemic.
That's crazy. You think about Rotherham, 1,400 children abused just in Rotherham from 1997 to 2013. And that's horrifying enough, but then he lays out similar situations in Rochdale, Oxford, Telford. It just keeps going.
Yeah, and it goes on and on. And, that's where the 2014 J report really comes in. And Riker really dissects it. He talks about not just the systemic failures, but the victim blaming that was rampant.
Oh, yeah.
Remember Emma's story? 12 years old, abused in Rotherham, but the authorities just labeled her a troublemaker.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how many Emmas are out there, just completely dismissed and unheard.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that really got me when I was reading this was just how sophisticated these gangs were operating.
Oh, yeah.
Not just, physical abuse.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond that.
It's methodical. They prey on vulnerable individuals.
Yeah.
Often, girls from broken homes or girls lacking support system.
Right.
Then comes the love bombing, the showering with gifts and affection, making the victim feel special.
Right.
And really isolating them from their real support network.
It's so insidious. It's like creating this dependency,
Yeah.
this warped sense of reality
Exactly.
where the abuse becomes normalized.
Exactly. The abuse just becomes normal. That's all they know. Wow.
And of course, drugs and alcohol often involved in this,
Oh, of course.
just to further break down any kind of resistance they might have.
And so then these victims are just completely trapped. They're believing that this is all they deserve.
Absolutely. And Riker goes into detail about the institutional failure that allowed this to go on.
He doesn't hold back.
He calls out the police, social services, schools, even the healthcare system.
It's like everyone was looking the other way.
It really is. And one of the key factors that Riker highlights is this fear of accusations of racism that paralyzed a lot of these institutions, particularly the police.
Especially the police, yeah.
There was this one case in Rotherham where a 14-year-old girl reports abuse, and the police tell her it's a lifestyle choice. Can you imagine that?
It's unbelievable. And it wasn't just the police. It was social services, schools, like you said, even healthcare, where victims were being ignored or blamed.
It's a total systemic breakdown. It really is.
Yeah.
And one thing that is so frustrating that he highlights is just a lack of coordination between all these different agencies.
Absolutely.
Like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah. The information's not being shared. Opportunities to intervene are missed.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
It's tragic. This one part of the book where he highlights this case in Telford,
Yeah.
where his victim's counselor tells her to just move on.
Yeah.
Imagine the lack of understanding there. The dismissal of this girl's trauma.
Absolutely.
It's infuriating. Riker argues that, part of this stems from these bureaucratic inefficiencies
Yeah.
that plague these institutions. Staffing, lack of training,
Complacency.
all of that played a role.
Yeah, it all plays a role.
Yeah.
And what you're left with is a sense that these girls were just completely vulnerable.
Totally.
Let down by the very people who should have been protecting them.
Yeah, it's really tough to read.
It is.
And in the next part, we're going to kind of dig deeper into some of the cultural factors here.
Yeah.
And the long-term impact on these victims. It's heavy stuff,
It is.
but it's crucial to understand.
Yeah, absolutely crucial to understand the full picture. We
Absolutely.
can't just scratch the surface here.
Absolutely.
Dive deep.
We got to dive deep. All right, we'll be back in a minute with part 2.
It's tough to even imagine the impact this has on these girls.
Right.
The victims, it goes so much deeper than just, the physical and sexual abuse.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological trauma.
Immense.
Riker talks about high rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
tragically, even suicidal ideation
Absolutely.
among survivors. It's interesting because he points out how a lot of these girls
Yeah.
were already vulnerable
Yeah.
before the abuse even started.
Right.
A lot of them were from broken homes
Right. They didn't have the support systems.
Yeah.
They were already dealing with trauma
or mental health issues.
or mental health issues. And then to have this kind of abuse on top of that,
Yeah.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for,
Yeah.
and he talks about
Yeah.
this one girl, Sophie from Newcastle,
Yeah.
who overdosed after years of abuse.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really stuck with me too.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And you know, you read those stories and you think about, okay, so the abuse happened.
Right.
But the damage extends far beyond that.
Right.
It affects their relationships, their ability to trust,
Right.
their education.
Their future employment.
Yeah, their employment, even their ability to parent in the future.
It's a cycle.
It is. It's a cycle of, you know, abuse just breeding more abuse in a way.
It really is. And it makes you think about the role the media played in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, Riker points out how initially the media completely failed
Yeah.
to report on these grooming gangs.
They didn't want to touch it.
It's almost like
Yeah.
they were deliberately suppressing these stories. Like
Yeah.
it's too uncomfortable to even acknowledge.
Exactly. And what does that do to the victim? You know, it makes them feel invisible.
Right.
Like their stories don't matter.
Exactly.
And it allowed this abuse to continue for years.
Unchecked.
Checked.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there was this fear, you know, of covering these stories.
Right.
Especially when it came to, you know, the perpetrators being from, you know, certain ethnic or religious backgrounds.
Right.
It's like political correctness trumped, you know, the safety and well-being of these children.
It's like they were afraid to offend
Exactly.
certain groups.
Yeah. And those kids were just left out to dry.
And those kids were left to fend for themselves.
Yeah.
And I will say that Riker does acknowledge that investigative journalism ultimately played a huge role
Absolutely.
in exposing the truth.
Oh, yeah. He highlights those brave journalists who actually broke the silence.
Yes, hero.
The real heroes here.
Yeah.
And they pushed for accountability.
Right.
And they helped bring these crimes into the light.
Finally into the light. Yeah. And it's a reminder that the media can be a powerful force
Oh, absolutely.
for both good and bad.
You know, a double-edged sword. Right?
Yeah.
And it just underscores the need for responsible reporting.
Absolute. Facts over sensationalism.
Yeah, you got to stick to the facts. You got to report on what's actually happening.
And to Riker's credit, he doesn't just lay out the problem.
No.
He offers some potential solutions.
He does.
And he starts with education.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to stop this from happening, you got to equip children with the tool
Right.
to recognize it and resist these situations.
Yeah, so you know what are the signs.
Exactly. What are the signs? How can you resist?
Right.
And he's a huge advocate for comprehensive sex education
Yep.
that actually addresses grooming, not just, you know, the basic,
Yeah.
but, you know, going into online safety,
Right.
healthy relationships, consent,
Right.
you know, all the red flags.
All the red flags of manipulation.
Of manipulation.
Yeah.
You know, it's about empowering kids to understand their rights,
Right.
to feel confident speaking up.
Absolutely.
If something doesn't feel right.
Yes, if something feels off. And he also stresses the need for mandatory grooming prevention training
Absolutely.
for all school staff,
All school staff.
teachers,
Look,
administrators.
everyone needs to be able to recognize the signs,
Right.
know how to respond appropriately.
Yes, how to respond. And I like that he doesn't just limit it to schools either.
No.
He talks about parents
He talks about parents,
educating themselves
Absolutely.
and having open conversation
Yeah.
with their children about these issues.
which can be tough.
It can be a tough conversation,
Yeah.
but it's a necessary conversation.
It is. It's absolutely necessary. We have to break the taboo
Yes.
that surrounds these topics.
Right.
And, you know, we got to equip our children with the knowledge.
Yeah.
They need to protect themselves.
It goes back to, building that open communication
Yeah.
where kids feel safe
Yeah.
coming forward.
Absolutely. And Riker also emphasizes the importance of community engagement.
Yes, it's not just about educating individuals.
It's not just about the individual.
It's about fostering communities
Right.
that are just intolerant
Intolerant of abuse.
of abuse,
Yeah.
and supportive of victims.
Yeah. You got to create a culture where victims feel safe coming forward.
Absolutely.
Break that cycle of silence, you know, that complicity that allowed these gangs to operate for so long.
For so long, yeah. And then on the institutional level, he calls for some pretty significant reform
He does.
in law enforcement and the justice system.
Yeah.
He argues for stronger laws, harsher sentences, a lower threshold for evidence from the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yeah. He wants them to be able to prosecute these cases
Yeah.
much easier
Right.
without, you know, having this huge burden of proof.
And he really stresses the need for much greater support
Absolutely.
for the victim.
The victims need support.
Yeah.
They need counseling. They need therapy.
They need all of that.
Yeah.
And better training.
Yeah.
For police, social worker,
Yeah.
healthcare professional.
Absolutely. They need the tools to handle these cases effectively.
Yes.
They need to know what to look for.
They need to know how to identify and respond to grooming.
Absolutely. And ultimately, Riker says it comes down to political will.
Yes.
You know, we need leaders who are willing to prioritize child safety,
Yes.
even when it's politically unpopular.
Even when it's politically risky.
Even when it's politically risky, they got to take a stand.
They got to do what's right.
They got to do what's right.
And one thing that I found really insightful in the book is his analysis of how both the left and the right have engaged with this issue.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
Because both sides have really kind of dropped the ball here.
They have in different ways. Yeah.
Very different ways. And Riker, he argues that the far right
Yeah.
has often exploited this issue for political gain,
Right.
using divisive rhetoric, fueling anti-immigrant sentiment.
Yeah. And they really hone in on,
Yeah.
the ethnicity and the religion of the perpetrator.
Absolutely. And they ignore the broader systemic issues.
Right. Exactly.
It's just about, pointing fingers and creating fear.
Yeah. And it's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
because it leads to discrimination
Absolutely.
against innocent people.
Yeah, and then you look at the left.
Right.
Riker argues that their focus on identity politics has made them reluctant
Yeah.
to address this head on.
It's like they're afraid
They are.
of appearing racist or Islamophobic.
Yeah, they don't want to be seen as,
Right.
attacking any particular group.
Right.
So they kind of downplay the issues.
Yes.
Or they try to shift the blame.
Or they try to shift the blame. Yeah. And it's like another form of silencing the victim
It is.
and allowing the abuse to continue.
Absolutely.
And Riker's point is that we need to have honest, nuanced conversation
We do.
about this issue
Absolutely.
without resorting to fear-mongering
Yeah.
or political point scoring.
No more political games.
This is about
This is about the kids.
protecting children.
Absolutely.
This is not about one ethnicity, one religion,
No.
one political ideology.
It's a human problem.
This is a human problem that requires a human solution.
Absolutely. We need a human solution, and we need to move beyond our biases.
Yes, beyond our bias
Work together
and work together.
to create a safer world for our kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A powerful message.
It is. And in the final part,
Yeah.
we're going to delve a little deeper into Riker's call to action.
Okay.
Explore the cultural and religious factors he highlights,
Yeah.
and really look at his suggestions for a way forward.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? How do we address those cultural and social factors
Yeah.
that contributed to this problem?
Without falling into that trap
Yeah.
of bigotry and prejudice.
Right, because we can't just ignore it.
Right.
Riker, he argues we can't afford to ignore the role of culture and community.
Right.
But we got to be careful.
Absolutely. And he talks about those dangers of cultural relativism,
Uh-huh.
where that fear of offending certain communities.
Leads to inaction.
Yeah.
And we've seen how that paralyzes institutions.
Right.
It prevents them from doing their job.
Absolutely.
And protecting vulnerable children.
And I think, he makes a really good point that you got to hold individuals accountable
Right.
while recognizing the broader cultural.
Yeah.
So it's not about blaming entire communities.
Right.
But we can't pretend that culture doesn't play a role.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he also tackles, that sensitive topic of religion.
Yeah.
And, he's careful not to demonize any particular faith.
Right.
But he points out how, sometimes religious leaders
Yeah.
provided moral cover
Yeah. They gave cover.
for these grooming activities.
Absolutely.
And how some individuals twisted religious texts
Yeah.
to justify those harmful attitudes towards women and girls.
And it's hard to hear.
It is.
But these are the kinds of things we have to examine if we
Yeah.
want to get to the root of the problem.
Yeah. And he's calling for honesty and an open dialogue. He wants to challenge those harmful interpretations of religious texts
Yeah.
and promote a more, respectful and egalitarian understanding of faith.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately,
Yeah.
Riker's book is a call for a more nuanced
Yes.
and informed approach
Yes.
to the whole issue of grooming gang.
Right.
It's a challenge to move beyond the simple narrative.
And the sound bites.
Yeah, we hear from both sides.
Yeah, from the left and the right.
This isn't a black and white issue.
Absolutely not.
This is a very complex issue.
It is, and it
Yeah,
requires,
so-
yes, absolutely.
Really and understand.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive here,
Yeah.
what are your key takeaways? What are you thinking about?
I think for me, the thing that really sticks with me is just the sheer scale of this problem.
Yeah.
And how these systemic failures
Yes.
allowed this to flourish for so long.
For so long.
It's a reminder that we can't be complacent.
Right.
We all have a responsibility to be vigilant.
Yes.
To speak up when we see something wrong.
Absolutely. I think for me, what was really chilling was just the level of manipulation
Yeah.
that these gangs employ.
Yeah, it's terrifying how calculated it was.
It really highlights how crucial education is.
It does.
We have to empower children
Yeah.
and equip those who work with them to recognize the signs
Absolutely.
of grooming and abuse.
Yeah. Riker's book is a wake-up call.
It is.
It's a challenge to do better.
Yes.
To be better.
Yeah. And if you're interested in learning more,
Yeah.
definitely check out Conrad Riker's book, Grooming Gangs, A Nation's Betrayal of Its Children.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks.
Yeah, we'll include a link.
In the episode description.
This has been a tough conversation,
It has been.
but a necessary one.
Absolutely.
The grooming gang crisis is a stain on our society,
It is.
but it's a stain that we can remove.
We can remove it. We just gotta
We
be willing to face the truth.
we have to face the truth.
We gotta learn from the past and work together
Yeah.
to create a safer future for all children.
Yes, it's a long road ahead,
It is a long road.
but we cannot afford to give up.
No.
The stakes are simply too high.
They are. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep learning, keep questioning,
And keep fighting
for what's right.
for what's right. Absolutely.